If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, what's your scariest camping experience? Solo camp in the middle of nowhere. When I woke up in the morning, someone had made a cup of tea and partially drunk it in the middle of the night. No sign of anyone anywhere. Camping with my kids in the woods for the first time. They were very nervous, but I assured them that nothing was out there to be afraid. Immediately after one of my assurances, we heard something moving outside of the tent. They started crying a bit, and I said it was either the wind or maybe a raccoon a little bit away. At that moment, something came down on the top of the tent, something pushing in at 4 spots. They lost their minds with terror, even I screamed. It was our cat. My wife had let him outside, and he made his way down in the woods to see us. He was young and had never seen a tent before and jumped on top of it right above us. This was a few years ago, and my kids still bring up how scary it was and how Daddy screamed. I'm Native American based out of Oregon. Back in around 2006, I went on a youth camping trip with some tribal leaders over the course of spring break. I recall we were all sitting around the campfire winding down at night after dinner, and I absent-mindedly started whistling. One of the tribal leaders told me to knock it off, and then proceeded to tell me why. I learned that there really is a mythology to explain all kinds of things, but this one terrified me as a teen. It's the story about why we sleep at night. Natives are spiritual people. The night time belongs to the spirits. We give them that time by going to sleep. But the spirits also have these creatures that defend their time. For example, imagine there's a 16-year-old absent-mindedly whistling in the middle of the night, disturbing the one time a day that you get to just be you. This would make an angry spirit, and being that you're also a powerful spirit, you could cause chaos the likes of which the world has never seen. So out of respect for the spirit, and fear of what they may do to the world, creatures called stick people come and take the 16-year-old away so that they're never seen or heard from again. Stick people are, according to the legend I was given, entities that will try to cause people to become lost and alone, by luring them to places they have no business being, like out into the woods at night. I think about the story every time I whistle. A buddy and I were on a camping trip in the Poudre Canyon outside Fort Collins, Colorado. It was late in the season, so all of the campgrounds were closed. We found a random spot off of a random road. Both of us have a ton of experience and had camped all over CO and UT, but something about this particular spot was just off. Almost immediately, we found a blanket wrapped around a deceased, skeletal animal. We assumed it was just a pet that someone had thrown out, but it set the mood. We went hiking, climbed up a few hills and came across an abandoned tent wrapped up in a tree. I was certain we were going to find a body in it, but it was just filled with notebooks and a sleeping bag. We start hiking down the hill and end up walking down the side, very steep. As we are traversing down, we are hit with the smell of death. Nestled into a tree, on the side of a very steep hill, is a small towel with something clearly inside of it. We leave it be and hike down. This is probably 200 to 300 feet up the side of steep hill with the towel in a tree, facing the top of the hill. Clearly intentionally put here. We down some bourbon, build up some courage, and hike back up. Grab a stick, open up the towel. Inside, a very recently deceased owl. Somehow, someway, someone had killed this owl, wrapped it in a towel, hiked up a steep hill off a random mountain road, and stuck it beside a tree. We started a fire, slammed the bourbon, and got the duck out of there in the morning. I love telling this story. I was doing a solo hike in the Arizona wilderness, Rincon MTS. And I was a day deep in the dirt. I stopped in a shady spot and made, ate, and cleaned up my lunch. When I was done, I smoked a bowl with my proto pipe. The pipe has a built-in brass poker that I dropped at my feet in some sand. It buried itself, so I was sifting the sand with my hands looking for it. But I couldn't find it. I started getting frustrated because I watched it hit. It should just be right there. But I could not find it. Duck it, I say. Grabbed my shit and hiked another 8-ish miles to my campsite. I set up my camp. Made a fire ring. Did all of the typical nighttime stuff, fire, food, hanging out with my dog, and then went to sleep. When I woke up in the morning, I went to start my fire. And on the fire ring was my poker that I had lost. It scared the shit out of me. I stuffed my shit in my bag and was gone within minutes. It triggered the primal fear of my monkey brain and I hiked out in about 8 hours, which took days to do before. I literally was fleeing in full terror mode the whole time. But when I look back on it, I kinda feel bad because I'm sure whatever did it was just trying to do me a solid. In college I did a lot of solo car camping from the back of my truck I owned at the time. I went to a remote public area in the Ozarks and planned to stay overnight. After setting up all my bedding and having dinner, and a sugary dessert, I decided to hunker down for the night. Well, about 45 minutes after turning off the light, I start hearing leaves crunching in the woods about 30 yards away. Not really concerned, I write it off as an opossum, deer, coyote, etc., just moving through the area. However, my imagination started going wild as it always does, and I start thinking of the worst situations. More leaves crunching, but closer. Definitely in the campsite. I usually carry a can of bear spray, but being a dumb kid, I didn't think about the fact that I was in an enclosed space until I was ready to use it. More crunching leaves, but further away. I start to relax a little as eventually they disappear. Nerves completely racked, I try to go to sleep. I think at some point I get into a really light sleep and wake up about 2 to 3 hours later. It's about 2 in the morning and there is very obviously something walking between me and the campfire. At this point a deep, loud, and incredibly scary voice from inside my truck camper asks, "Do you believe in God?" I ducking start screaming and turn on headlamps, thrashing, and get ready to defend for my life. The footsteps run away and disappear into the woods as I'm in full panic mode. I have to tell myself I hallucinated the whole thing because of the sugary dessert I ate before bed. Still gets my heart racing when I think about it too much to this day. I was tent camping in Arkansas around 2003-04, and the Blair Witch Project was still fresh on my mind. I was about 20 years old at the time. Around 2 to 3 in the morning we're woken up by what sounds like a small child running around our tent crying and trying to get in. I was thoroughly freaked out. Finally decided to open the tent and there was a kid that couldn't have been more than 3 years old, scared half to death and only wearing a diaper. I had lots of thought going through my head, but mostly, how the hell do I handle this? I can't really go campsite to campsite, the ranger office is closed and I'm standing there in the middle of the night holding a child that isn't mine. We had decided to call the cops, figuring it was the safest thing to do. Just then a lady walks down the trail and is like, "How did you get out?" The kid was saying, "Mama, Mama," and went straight to her. She nonchalantly said, "Thank you," and walked away. Now as a parent, I can't imagine how much more that would freak me out if it were my kid. Hiking a trail in East Tennessee. Hadn't seen a soul since leaving the parking lot that morning. Make camp up on top of a rock bluff 50 yards off the trail as the sun sets, quick dinner, then probably asleep by 7 o'clock. Around 11 o'clock I wake up hearing voices which sound like muttered German. I listen for a few minutes and I can hear footsteps and the voices coming toward the tent. I wake up my hiking partner who hears the same thing I'm hearing. The footsteps stop what seems like 10 from the tent and the same 2 mumbling voices. I unzip the tent and look out and there's nothing. Get my flashlight, shine around, nothing. After a few minutes I get back in the tent, we both try to sleep and after a few minutes the voices start up again and what sounds like someone cutting a tree with an axe. My partner pulls on his boots, we both agree the sound is 10 away to the right of the tent. He unzips the tent slowly, we are still hearing sounds, he jumps outside with his flashlight, heads in that direction, nothing. We sit outside the tent for over an hour because there's no way we're going to sleep but we hear nothing. Eventually we are both about to pass out so we go back in the tent and fall asleep. Around 3:30 the axe sound starts again, we both just lie there listening and a few minutes later we hear the cracking and whooshing sound of a falling tree, heard and felt the thud as it hit the ground. We both jumped up and scrambled out of the tent and there was nothing. No sound at all. No wind whistling through the trees. No bugs. No frogs. Just silence. We packed up everything in minutes but decided not to leave because climb back down to the trail was difficult in daylight and too risky in the dark. We sit there until the sun comes up without hearing the voices or axe again. We'd calmed down somewhat by that point and started searching the area. We probably went 100 yards in every direction from our camp and there was no sign anyone had been there and certainly no large recently fallen tree. I was pretty young, went camping with my dad in Alabama. It's late at night, the embers of the fire are dying down, we're about to go to sleep, when we hear what I can only describe as a bone-chilling moan in the woods. We looked at each other and decided it was trees rubbing together, but then it happened 2 more times. My dad grabbed the flashlight and I walked behind him with a big stick, determined I would save him if something went wrong. Eventually we discover a woman lying on the ground, not far from our campsite. She was on a hill, with her head facing down, feet uphill, continuing to moan. Turns out she had so much to drink that she could hardly talk, but she was also camping out in these woods with her boyfriend. They had a big fight and he drove away, leaving her alone in the forest. She had seen our fire dying and wanted to give us the rest of her firewood before she left too, but had tripped and was too drunk to get up. We got her back to her campsite, and made sure she wasn't driving anywhere that night. I'll never forget that moaning sound though. I was once solo camping for the first time in Harz, Germany. It was my first time going alone and I was very new to this. When I arrived in Wernigerode I started walking but the path on my map didn't exist so I went back. It was already dark when I returned to the village so I decided to sleep in the hills close to the village. After I set up camp I wanted to sleep but I heard noises. It almost sounded like a baby crying and screaming in short bursts. I really got paranoid over a 15-minute time, slowly hearing the sounds coming closer. After a while the sound was so close that I decided duck this, put on my clothes, went out of the tent and dragged it to the road. I packed everything and went into the village again and slept in the local park. Unfortunately there were no places hidden from the path so I chose to sleep as far away from the path in only my green sleeping bag. Next day I woke up early and got back. So now with more experience it was probably some bird and my paranoia made it worse than it was. I was too young to remember, but my mom has told this story numerous times. I had to have been about 3, my brother was 7. We'd gone as far as you can take a toddler up in the mountains and set up a nice little campsite. Had hot dogs and s'mores then as kids do, we were ready to sleep around 8 p.m. Around 3 to 4 a.m., my mom woke up to weird sounds outside the tent. With very little light she couldn't see anything but her worst fear was that it was a bear. We'd hung our food and trash like you're supposed to, so she was hoping it would lose interest and leave. After about 10 minutes of all this shuffling, crunching leaves and snapping branches she decided to have a look. As soon as she opened the tent flap she realized a bear was not the worst thing that she could have seen because she was now face to face with a full-grown moose who couldn't be more interested in what was in the tent. She says she stared it dead in the eyes for a full 5 seconds and then quick as you like zipped up the tent and grabbed my brother and I and just prayed to whatever God that this moose wouldn't trample us to death. My brother woke up but I was dead asleep the whole time. I can still sleep through goddamned anything. My mom cried and was shaking while this stupid moose sniffed around our tent for another few minutes and then when it finally left didn't sleep the rest of the night. She said she's never been so scared in her life. At least with a bear she could have made some noises, got a coat and been bigger than it was. A moose though? No chance. If it had decided to trample the tent she wouldn't have been able to do anything. Not mine but a friend's. 2021 rural Virginia in the mountains. Friend let's call James, was meeting his other friends near a creek surrounded by woods and mountains. James gets there early as the sun is setting, he makes camp and rests for a bit and when the sun is gone he hears rustling in the woods across the river. Thinks it's just a deer for the first few minutes but slowly he realizes it's making a pattern of movement, as in it's going back and forth between places numerous times. Not just some animal wandering. He grabs his knife but hears his friend's big-ass truck coming down the slope. They greet each other. Michael, new friend, I had a concerning look about it. If I remember right. James, what's going on? Michael, that was real funny asshole. James, what? Michael, I heard you following behind me. When I was walking down the slope. I heard something following me in the woods. So James tells him about the thing pacing and they think it may just be a crackhead, cause this regions was notorious for them. They eventually just start talking about random shit forgetting the rustling, but they eventually say something along the lines of where's Liam, their final friend coming. Half an hour later Liam, final friend, shows up with pizzas and is running towards their location at full blast. He gets to them and James asks him why are you running so fast? Lima tells them that he heard something rustling in the woods behind him. They said the same thing that happened to them but Liam then says, okay, if it's a crackhead that's fine, but how did it know my name? Liam says that something in the trees kept whispering his name, and the pacing got faster as Liam sped up away from it. So eventually they settled in and around midnight hear a loud thump in the water, like something dive into it near their camp. They nope the hell out of there, and when they get back to their trucks to head off they hear the woods growing alive with birds screaming, winds and wolves howling as something is following them. They heard the pacing again. James tells me he heard it whisper his name. James thinks it was a skinwalker. I go camping fairly frequently and I still haven't told my friends about this one yet because I'm not sure I believe it myself. So I was camping with friends in a pretty secluded spot in the northern part of Lake Powell, Utah. We had been drinking but more to make sleeping easier. Anyway, we all called it a night and went to our tents. The stars were awesome and it was pretty warm so I was sleeping without my rain fly on. I was just starting to get comfortable under the stars when I saw something I hadn't seen before. It looked like a normal sized star with two smaller, but distinctly separate round stars/objects to the left and right of it. When I noticed it, I swear I looked at it every way I could. I squinted, I looked away and back, but I was just truly seeing this strange object/group of stars. And almost as soon as I confirmed that I wasn't hallucinating, The two smaller objects both quickly separated in opposite directions from the main star until I lost track of them. I don't know what I saw, but I had some deep thoughts that night about who/what is watching us. I wasn't as scared as I should have been, but my fear gene is broken and I had been drinking, so. We have a lake less than an hour from home, and my daughter's friend had never been camping, so we decided to do a quick overnight there. We, mom and daughter, 18 then, camp a lot and like the solitude, so we often try to find the most remote places. No campsite or anything, just drive up and find a space. So we found this nice little peninsula big enough for about 3 campsites, and it being Sunday, we were hoping the other 2 groups would leave. They did eventually and we had the place very much to ourselves. As the night goes on we have a nice fire, sing, laugh, I'm drinking wine, we're making s'mores, everything is perfect until we go to sleep. About an hour in the girls are bugging me to wake up because it's raining and we need to put the cover on the tent, huge tent so all hands needed. By now the wind is blowing and we're struggling, but we finally get it covered and it's back to sleep we go, until a motorcycle. More specifically a dirt bike. At about 2 a.m., just riding circles around the peninsula. Mind you, this is literally a small enough area that only 3 large tents plus 3 cars would fit, and there's nothing else nearby but bushes and a lake. There would be no reason to be there as it was obvious we were alone. Up, down, around he rides, then stops. Almost an hour this goes on. Up, down, around and stop, around and stop, never cutting the engine. I just want to sleep so I go to the front of the tent and unzip. I look outside and see him just staring. So I climb out of the tent and stare back. It's dark and I can't tell if this creep can even see me, so I go back in the tent, frustrated. The girls ask what he's doing and when I tell them they get really frightened. I tell them I'm gonna go give him a piece of my mind. They're terrified, demand I don't leave the tent. So I settle back in and wait. Up, around, circle, engine rev, idle, over and over. This goes on for at least another hour. I've had it. Down, up, around, all with that annoying blatting motocross sound blasting by our tent back and forth and stop. I look out. He's staring again. I'm about to go stomping over to go tell him off when I get the tingles all down my spine. He was facing directly towards our tent, saying nothing. Just still and staring. I realize I have no weapons, no way to protect the girls, and he's between us and the car. I wait. I'm outside the tent but I haven't made a move forward because now instinct and logic have the better of me, and I realize that an aggressive approach is probably the wrong move. I stay stock still just like the rider for what felt like an eternity. Both of us staring. Must have been 20 minutes I stood there. And then just like that, he took off. Drove off the peninsula and out of earshot and never came back. To this day I'll never know what that was about or if I did the right thing. I can only say I'm glad I never confronted him. My gut just told me no.
As for my daughter and I think I need to buy a gun if we're gonna camp alone like this.
I was camping once up in Michigan, in a pretty secluded spot with distinct individual campsites. It was in the fall, so dead leaves were all over the ground. When we were settling into sleep, we started to hear these slow, consistent footsteps on the leaves. They'd walk around the campsite, circle our tent, just walk all around without any clear goal and without stopping. Obviously we assumed it was some kind of animal, but when we rushed out with a light there was nothing, I mean no sound, no trace of anything. Once we were back in the tent, these footsteps immediately started up again, and they didn't come from far away, they started up right next to our tent. We repeated this whole rigmarole probably 3 more times, because of how distinct and close and creepy those footsteps were, and we never caught even a glimpse of what was walking around. The next morning we were sitting by the fire and started hearing the steps again, only to look down and realize it was the sound of multiple small frogs hopping around the campsite. Used to camp at this, fairly, secluded spot on state land, it has since been discovered and become popular, unfortunately. I've been going to that site since I was a kid, and it had become an annual tradition for my buddies and I to kinda unplug and rough it for a few days. However, at the time, a little over 15 years ago now, it was relatively unknown and it was a bit of a trek to get to the campsite. Middle of the woods, but close to a lake, perfect for swimming. We're talking no cell signal, no light pollution, you're just out in the wilderness. My buddies and I were geeked to get out there and spend the week camping every summer. One summer afternoon I'm the first to arrive, ready for a week of camping, drinking and swimming. However, to my dismay, I discover that the site already has an established campsite going. There's a couple tents set up. Granted, it's a fairly large campsite so I decide to haul my gear over and see if I can talk the other campers into letting us share the spot. Who knows, they might be cool and maybe it'll be one big party. I come up to the site, and there's no people. The tents are empty. There was evidence of a campfire, so I know there were people here not too long ago. I decide to check the lake, maybe they went swimming. There's a steep path that leads from the site to the lake, and as I'm walking alongside it, I discover some debris that is blown down along the path. There's a sleeping bag, some tools, and some clothes that had been on a line but now they're all in the dirt. All evidence that this site has actually been set up for a while. The clothes are wet with ditch water, they've been sitting on the ground in the path for some time. There's no people at the lake, and when I return to the site, upon further investigation I discover that this site has been abandoned for some time. But that doesn't explain why they just left everything behind. From what I could tell, the people camping here had left in a big ducking hurry. There's clothes, there's food and other gear. I mean, it's an entire camp. The tents were fairly new. I mean, it's not just stuff that you leave behind unless you're scrambling and only grabbing the essentials. What was weird to me was that the fire was out, but there was still ice in their coolers and beers, so it couldn't have been too long ago that they were there. My other buddies arrive and we decide to set up camp nearby and keep an eye on it. Maybe the people had to leave for an emergency or something. We wind up camping out the whole week and no evidence of people coming back to retrieve their stuff. Luckily, the DNR happened to stop by on patrol and we filled them in our discovery. They let us know they'd be packing up the stuff and take it into a lost and found up at their station. Kinda creepy, mostly weird. Who knows what happened to those people? Went camping with my girlfriend about 4-ish years ago in the mountains just east of where we live. We're both a little hippie so we brought some toys, juggling bags, Diabolo, poi, etc., and thought it might be fun to bring out our recently acquired brass singing bowls. We have 3 different sizes that produce different tones with the middle-sized, green bowl being our favorite in both appearance and tone. If you've ever played a singing bowl before, you know they don't just make the tone by themselves and it can take a little effort to get the tone out cleanly and clearly. In my opinion, that's kind of the fun of the bowls, is coaxing the sound out of it. It adds a little bit of necessary skill and makes the singing bowls an instrument with a little exclusivity. The second night out there, after bedding down for the night, I wake up suddenly to hear the green bowl unmistakably singing. My girlfriend was in the tent with me so it definitely wasn't her. Again, they don't sing by themselves, they have to be played, so of course the both of us were rightly surprised, perplexed, and admittedly freaked out by the fact that this bowl was singing, seemingly, of its own accord. She nudged me to see if I was experiencing the same thing she was. Looked at me, wide-eyed, and said, "Are you hearing this, too?" I nodded for fear that my speech would cause the bowl to stop. After staring at each for what felt like an eternity, realistically, it was about 3 or 4 minutes, we quietly resolved to make our way over to the zipper flap of the tent and open it just enough to see what was playing our bowl. However, as soon as we started to move, the bowl stopped. And not just like someone stopped playing it and walked away. No, it stopped. The bowl muted. No resonating tone whatsoever. It was like someone had grabbed the edge of the bowl, like you would a cymbal on a drum kit, and silenced it instantly. After the muting, we rushed ourselves out of the tent in the hopes that maybe we could catch sight or sound of whatever it was that decided to stop by and play with our singing bowl. But alas, nothing was there, no footprints, no trail, no indication that anything at all had been anywhere near the bowl. We still cannot explain what happened that night, and it's one of those stories that even now sends a bit of shiver down my spine and makes my hair stand a little on end. Whatever played our bowl that night didn't feel hostile or angry. Maybe curious and playful. But it definitely didn't want us to know what it was. Buddy and I were fishing a remote hike in lake in southern Utah with float tubes. We could tell from the map that the trail was mostly uphill, but nothing too steep and only a few miles. The hike was beautiful but exhausting. It passed through some densely wooded areas, then it would open up to grassy meadows, then back to dense woods. We finally made it to the lake, which was situated at the base of a huge cliff, probably 1,000 feet above us, so we can't really see anything to the north but trees and cliff face. We're still resting/recovering from the hike when I notice a cloud appearing over the top of the cliff above us. It starts out white and fluffy, then quickly changes to dark gray, darker gray, then practically black. Then the thunder and lightning start up. We only planned to fish for the day, then go back to our base camp for the night, so we didn't have our tent or sleeping bags with us. Due to the ominous clouds and all the lightning, we decided it was best to skip fishing and start hiking back down the mountain. No sooner do we start hiking and downpour starts, then we hear the roar of a mountain lion. It's hard to say how far away it was with all the noise from the heavy rain and the thunder echoing off the cliff face, but it sounded really close to us, like less than 100 yards. It poured rain and occasionally hailed the entire hike down the mountain. Every time we got into a densely wooded section, it seemed like the lightning got worse or we'd hear large animals moving through the brush near the trail. We never saw the mountain lion, but we wondered if it was stalking us. We finally make it safely back to the trailhead, and our car, without getting attacked by an animal or struck by lightning. We were literally soaked to the bone and completely exhausted, but dinner was amazing that night and I don't think I've ever slept as well as I did that night. A few years ago my GF at the time and I wanted to take a road trip to Bryce Canyon. We live in SoCal, so we took a week off from work to have time to drive up, camp a few days and drive back. We drive to the national park without incident. When we are there we discover that it is packed and there is not an open campsite. We were noobs, so we drove out of the park and a county over. About 30 to 40 minutes away from the park there was a dirt road that went off on the side, and we decided to see where it leads. As we follow the road it gets rougher and rougher, to the point where we slow down to deal with the rocks and unevenness. After an hour of this and to our relief we see signs for a campground up ahead. I do not remember the campground name. But it was a real place and it wasn't too shabby. But there was hardly anyone there and it was pretty big. We kinda just pick a campsite and set up. No one charged us for anything, no one said anything. We had a couple good nights there. Now the scene is set and on to the scary part. On the third evening there, at about 4ish in the afternoon my GF and I are at our campsite and we had just finished cleaning our bowls and utensils and were putting them away. And we hear faint but close rustling and a doe pops out from behind a tree, about 15 feet away. Very close and coming closer. My GF moves very slowly towards her bag, which has her camera, which is in the tent behind her to her right. The deer was not frightened at all though and didn't get all that close, maybe 10 feet away, and my GF was able to get a picture of the doe. And then the deer walked away slowly into the woods. And my GF and I looked at each other and for whatever reason we both had the same thought. Let's follow her. We follow the deer keeping pace but walking slowly behind the deer and follow the deer maybe 10 minutes outside of the campground. And she was able to get some great shots of the deer walking through the woods with sun rays. As we were looking at this amazing photo she took, we look up at the deer and it's gone. And in front of us forest. In back of us forest. All around just forest with no way of telling which way we came from or where to go. And I hear you, dear reader, saying just turn around and walk back the way you came, but we did just that. We walked back the way we thought we came and we didn't recognize anything. It was quiet too. Not even birds. We couldn't hear people at all. We were a 10 minutes walk away from the campsite, we should hear someone. Right? Anyways we try to retrace our steps but we don't recognize anything. And the sun is going down and it's starting to get cold. So we start kinda of picking up pace, lightly jogging. And eventually we had to pull out our phones to see where we were going. We eventually saw a campfire through the trees and went there. The people there helped us realize where we were. Which somehow put us on the opposite side of the campground. I have no idea how we got so turned around. It took us another 45-ish minutes to find our campsite. Forever marking my path on trees now. It's crazy how easy it is to get lost. Or I'm just stupid. We were only lost for like 3 hours. But we were so confused and disoriented. It sounds stupid as I read and edit this. But it was scary. It's our second day camping, at a campground that I cannot remember the name of at the moment because of how long ago this was. We were tired from meeting with family that we haven't seen in a while, so we went to bed. We were in Indiana and I think it was a KOA campground. I think it was a wedding or something. We opted for camping because it was about the same price as a hotel room and we honestly prefer camping over a hotel room. We all fall asleep without any issue or cause for error. It is worth noting that we were sleeping in our hybrid camper, half pop-up and half RV, I think that's what it is. All I know is we were essentially glamping. But we are awoken from our sleep in the middle of the night, around 1 or 2 in the morning, by a blood-curdling scream. When camping you grow used to shouts or screams, usually they stem from excitement or something else. But not this one. This was a scream that instilled terror. This was a scream that you hear in a horror movie. There was fear in their voice as they let out their scream. This obviously caused us all to wake up. We sat around discussing what caused such a scream. We had a few macabre theories but nothing solid. Unlike a horror movie we do not investigate where the scream came from because that's dumb. Time passes and we do hear an ambulance siren, not knowing where it was or if it was even related to the scream. We eventually all go back to bed. Dawn breaks and we have a relaxing day of camping ahead of us. I doubt any of us simply forgot about the scream. My mother scoured nearly every single news outlet to see if a report was sent in about this. If there was a story about a sudden death, a victim of murder, or something else. She couldn't find anything. We left the campground the day after without finding out anything about the scream. All we knew was it belonged to a woman of some kind, not middle-aged and not childlike either. It was the weirdest and scariest thing we had ever encountered camping-wise. When I was a kid, probably around 11 to 13, my best friend's grandparents lived on a farm, maybe 100 acres of forest with a few clearings and a house, that we used to camp out in all the time. One night, a few of us were camping and we heard repeated thumps and screaming coming from the trees. We had literally just finished reading a book about Bigfoot in school and were positive that Bigfoot was out in the woods hitting trees and roaring. We got out of the tent, terrified, and walked through the woods towards the noise. Note, I guess people really do this kind of dumb thing, it's not just in horror movies. We eventually came to a clearing and found several of my friend's uncles trying to fix an old barn. While they were absolutely shit-faced. At like 2 o'clock in the morning. The thumps were the sound of them hitting wood with hammers. The screams were when they missed and hit themselves, because of the alcohol. We were terrified, but now it's hilarious. I live in a rural area and when I was younger I would occasionally bang 2 heavy sticks together as hard as I could at night hoping someone might mistake it for Bigfoot. I decided to go camping by myself on a Forest Service road where there was no one around. No campground, no other people, pretty isolated. Across the canyon there were others camping, but you couldn't see any fires at night. I brought my 2 small dogs with me, 13 pounds and 20 pounds, although they are small, they don't really vocalize or bark at all, only when they are scared or threatened. I am by no means an expert camper or outdoorsman. I enjoy being outside and decided that I'd get some equipment and go since none of my friends go camping. That night, the moon was bright, maybe full or at least very full, and you could see from it. I have a one-man tent and that night I left the flap open and just the screen shut to keep the bugs out. The smallest of my dogs always makes me cuddle her when we sleep, she's always the baby spoon. Right as I'm drifting off to sleep, she starts this low guttural growl, which wakes up my other dog who does the same thing. My adrenaline kicks into overdrive as I break out into a cold sweat, heart racing, and I sit straight up. I shine my flashlight into the woods and get out of my tent. I hear something run off into the distance. Let's just say that I did not sleep well that night and my 3-night trip quickly turned into a 1-night trip and I gave not been camping since. I was on a camping trip with scouts and me and my friend were put in the same tent as this weird kid. He was acting up all the time, getting into fights, and showing off how many knives he had. Anyways, one night we're in our tent playing blackjack and I guess I said something that pissed him off cause he started yelling at me. Well, that let the scout leaders know we were still up so they told us to get to bed. I don't know how long I was asleep but I woke up to him choking me. I thrashed about and tried to get him off me but I couldn't focus and was panicking. I remember the tent seemed to be getting darker, and how heavy my eyelids were getting. My chest and head were hurting and aching trying to get me to breathe but I just felt so tired. I was starting to fade away thinking my last thing I would hear was his laughter when wham! My friend had woken up cause of me struggling and him laughing and got up and started clobbering the dude. I was part coughing and part breathing once he got off me. My friend screamed for help and it got the adults' attention. He was yelled at for what he did and they shuffled around people so that he would be sleeping in a tent alone right near the adults' tents. I got into a tent with my older brother and I must have woke up 3 times that night kicking and screaming from nightmares of him killing me. When we all got back from the camp his parents were told what happened and that he was banned from scouts. They also told my mom and it must have taken the active will of God for her not to go and kick him. He got banned from a bunch of other activities that we both did so I didn't really ever see him again. I still wake up scared from nightmares of being choked or suffocated. And while I am a pretty sound sleeper if anyone tries to walk or get close to me while I am asleep I shoot up awake and panic. I can't even really nap with my dogs cause of it. I don't know if I'll ever be able to sleep soundly around anyone ever again. I grew up camping and doing backpacking trips with my family all over the Sierra Nevada mountains. Being very comfortable and experienced in the hills I started doing wilderness solo hikes when I was in my early 20s. Some of them would last for weeks and would involve things like my dad dropping me off at a trailhead outside of Yosemite and picking me up somewhere like Smith Valley, Nevada 3 weeks later. I always had a GPS locator with a way to contact my family and my routes were very well planned. I always take a pistol with me and the first 2 rounds are always snake shot because rattlesnakes are very common in the area. So I'm doing a hike across the Ansel Adams wilderness with no tent, just a sleeping bag under the stars. 3 days into the trip I'm sitting by a small lake as the sun is going down and I'm getting ready to settle in for the night. But just as I make the decision to stand I look up and there is a huge ducking mountain lion standing about 20 feet from me. The next few moments can only be described as being awkward. I calmly sat back on my rock and unholster my pistol but make no sudden moves. I don't want to shoot the animal and I doubt 2 rounds of snake shot followed by a few .38s would really do a lot. If it came to that, hopefully it would at least give it an attitude adjustment or the sound would scare it away. So here I am about 40 miles from any sign of civilization and I start talking to the lion. It was all I could really think to do, so I started telling it about that day's hike and some of the things I had seen. I talked about the weather and asked if it knew any good places to grab a bite, preferably something not bipedal. This conversation went on for maybe a minute as the lion paced very slowly, never breaking eye contact. Then, after what felt like eons, it just casually turned and walked away. I sat there talking for a good 20 minutes before the adrenaline started to wear off and I was suddenly exhausted. Sleeping was difficult, especially trying to hold a knife in one hand and a pistol in the other, but once my eyes were closed it seemed like an instant, then the sun was back up. As I got closer to the end of the trip, an unexpected and unusually high heat wave comes in. The temperature was over 105 degrees at 10,000 plus foot elevation. Water sources seemed to dry up overnight. I knew where some natural springs were located, but they were off my route or were around 20 miles away. Without exerting more energy than I needed to, I still arrived at my rendezvous point a full day early. A tire blowout led to my dad being almost a day late and the water source at the pickup spot was now bone dry. So I had about 60 to 72 hours in 100 plus weather at elevation without water. I was able to get a tiny bit of water from a solar still I made and wrapping a bag around some plants. Just enough to stay alive. By the time my dad got to me I was having full-on hallucinations and was in pretty bad shape. Luckily he showed up with a case of Gatorade, vitamin water, a cooler filled with ice packs and protein bars. I got checked out by a doctor in Carson City just to be safe. The forecast had nothing about the heat wave and water was abundant until after it hit, so there was nothing I could have done to better prepare for that situation. Definitely a terrifying trip, and after many more adventures my wife refuses to let me do long wilderness trips alone. During a group camping trip, we went on a 10-mile hike and on the way back to the campsite, I commented I just had to shower, so the camper with the car said he could drop me off at the shower barn about a half-mile away from the campsite since he had to go into town to get some supplies but wasn't going to wait for me if I wasn't done showering and waiting outside the barn on his way back. Well, as I was frantically drying off trying to get outside so I could hitch a ride back to the campsite, I heard him drive by and out of sight. So, I looked in my bag and I did manage to have a small flashlight, but had to walk a half-mile back to the group in total darkness. Now, I was 28 years old at the time and had long outgrown being scared of the dark, but let me tell you, that was the most scared I have been in my entire life. I mean, the small ribbon of light cast by this flashlight was almost worse than me not having any light at all, but it helped keep me on the road. In addition to that, there were cracks and breaks of twigs the entire walk and I literally waited to be pounced on by something or some axe murderer. After complete terror that seemed to last forever, I rounded a corner and saw the campfire, which was one of the best sights my eyes have ever given me. I played it totally cool when the group turned and cheered my return, but I had to go into the tent and collect myself before coming back to the fire. Woke up the next morning to the same twig break sounds and discovered it was a huge herd of elk just walking to the next spot to feed. Must have been walking with the herd the night before and not known it. Man, the woods are dark. Went backpacking with my GF and a buddy of mine in Tahoe area a few years ago in October for my girl's birthday. A place called Desolation Wilderness. We were on day 2 of the trip and decided to camp out at a place called Lake of the Woods. The lake was pristine and pretty big. There was absolutely nobody in our immediate area, maybe about a half-mile on the other side of the lake from what we noticed. GF and I set up our tent close to a down log, and my buddy set his up adjacent to us. Pretty much the whole night it was just us. We were close to a trailhead so we didn't see or hear any other people come in. We were joking around about running into a bear and then we ultimately freaked ourselves out. We decided to just go to sleep and head out early in the morning. After we dozed off, I was awakened a few hours later by a distant snoring, or what I thought was snoring. I listened while I stay frozen and motionless in my sleeping bag. I was listening intently to see if it was my buddy in the next tent over. After I realized it wasn't him, terror came over me. It did sound like snoring, but it was a very deep rumble, an almost bellowing sound. I thought maybe someone came in the middle of the night and set up camp near us. I told myself this and put myself at ease and finally back to sleep. But, I'm such a light sleeper, I figured I would have heard someone coming in. Around 6:45 a.m. I finally decided to get up since I needed to piss like a racehorse. I reluctantly got out of the tent, peed, and then scoped out the immediate area. I saw nothing. To this day, I still don't know what that was. It was I think the second time I went to camp with some friends. We went to one of the mountains about almost 2 hours by bus from our city, and we went near the river, which is completely down the main road, so about an hour and a half walk from the wild parking in the middle of absolutely nowhere. We were just all having fun and else until I felt panic attack coming to me around midnight and impossible to calm myself down, so I decided to call my mom to come pick me up, an hour drive from home. My friend tried to convince me, but they know me lol, so I just let them my camping equipment since not all of them were well equipped, and proceeded to climb back to the main road. I put some music on speaker to calm myself down while walking in the complete dark with just the full moon light and my own phone, and right about 500 meters from the main road I hear some noises and tried to walk faster while not making too much noise with my breath in order to be able to hear as much as I can. And I saw a wolf walking by me. I completely froze and remembered that near this place we have a national park for wolf, and sometimes they manage to escape. Once he crossed to the opposite side of me, I just waited a bit and run in a ducking super high hill like I never run in my entire life, and found myself on the main road. Since it was pretty high in the mountain, I didn't had connection to tell my mom I reached the main road, so I decided to run my ass off until the closest village. 1 hour of pure running like the devil was chasing me, and when I finally saw the lights I was so ducking relieved. I saw a parking and decided to look from out of it in case my mom was parked there, and I thought I was about to shit myself for real. I just felt it a moment to look on the far right side of the parking, and I saw a woman standing there, just standing, looking at her feet without moving. There was a bit of wind that day to the point of my hair and open jacket moving, but nothing was moving on her, while literally the tree right next to her was moving, so I just turned my head left and right to see if there was someone and was like, bitch, you're just tired from all that running, this can't be it. I refused, and the moment I looked back where she was standing, nothing. I didn't want it to deal with more shit and run to the center of the village where I was able to get some connection. Texted my mom telling her where I'm at, waiting a whole hour. My mom lost her way countless of times before reaching me, and at 5 a.m. my mom was finally there to pick me up. I learned later on that this village was known to be the last village in my state, not how we call it, to stop witch hunt, and since that I went back there a decade after to visit all the commemorative places in that village.